On the morning of her wedding, Marlo Ashford sat before the mirror in a white dress she had never chosen, listening to her father behind her. Smile, Mr. Gantry has already paid off Elliot's hospital bills. Soon you'll forget all this crying. She didn't turn around. I'm not going down there. His hand tightened on her shoulder, his voice dropping lower and colder than any shout. You will not disgrace me today. There's a whole hall of people waiting. Marlo looked straight into his eyes through the glass and asked, in a voice frighteningly calm, You took his money before you told me, didn't you? He didn't deny it. He paid the hospital. He paid off the shipyard debt too. If you run, this family is out on the street. Then give it back. I've spent it. He said it as lightly as a man talking about a barrel of oil. I raised you. Today you repay your debt. Marlo stood up. She thought of Elliot, the man who had been laid to rest 14 months ago, leaving her a widow's name and a stack of bills worth more than a year of her wages. He isn't even cold yet, and you've already sold me. Her father pointed toward the staircase. You will smile. You will give your hand to your husband. After today, complain all you want inside his house. Marlo walked to the door, but she did not go down the stairs. She ran through the service corridor, barefoot because the wedding shoes wouldn't let her, straight out into the rain, and crashed into a man unloading crates from a delivery truck. She had no idea who she had just fallen into. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like and share it with someone you love. Subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the stories still to come. The flowers burst from the cardboard box, rolling across the rain-soaked sidewalk beside several bright red apples, and for one fleeting moment, Marlo simply lay there with both hands braced against the freezing pavement, her damp hair plastered to her cheek. The man rose first. He didn't look at the groceries scattered across the ground. He didn't look at the box with its crushed corner. Instead, his eyes dropped to her bare feet, before lifting to the white dress that was slowly absorbing the rain from the hem all the way to her knees, yet not a single expression crossed his face. Can you stand? Marlo didn't answer. She tried to get to her feet, but her right knee gave way almost immediately, and he caught her gently by the elbow with one large hand, dry, rough, and hardened by years of work. He held her for exactly 3 seconds before letting go the instant she found her balance, refusing to keep hold of her even for another moment. What are you running from? She could hear nothing except the pounding of her own heart inside her ears. Somewhere behind them, about 2 blocks away, someone was calling her name. A 60-year-old man I've spoken to fewer than 3 times. He gave the slightest nod, as though she'd just offered a perfectly reasonable explanation, one he'd heard many times before over the course of his life. Then he walked around the front of the truck, opened the cab door, and stood there, blocking it. Get in. Marlo looked at the open door, then at the stranger wearing a faded work jacket with the name of a trucking company embroidered across the chest, before glancing back toward the street behind her. Aren't you going to ask who I am? No. Why? Because you're shaking. She climbed inside. The door closed, and the sound of the rain instantly softened by half. He started the engine without another word. He didn't turn on the radio. He didn't ask where she wanted to go. Somehow, that silence allowed Marlo to breathe easily for the first time that entire morning. But the truck hadn't traveled even 300 yards before it came to a stop. At the corner, 3 vehicles were parked side by side, completely blocking the road, and Marlo recognized the second one before its door even opened. Her father stepped out, the boutonniere still pinned neatly to his suit jacket, his polished shoes sinking into the puddles without the slightest concern. Her mother climbed out after him, both hands clasped tightly in front of her stomach, her lips already pressed into the expression of someone on the verge of tears. Delaney remained standing beside the truck, making no move to step forward, simply watching. 2 of Gantry's men climbed out of the 3rd vehicle, and neither of them was wearing a wedding suit. Hollis Ashford rapped his knuckles against the cab window. Open the door. That girl's already been paid for. Marlo felt her entire body stiffen. Then she heard the lock on her side click softly into place, so quiet it was almost impossible to notice, and it wasn't until many months later that she'd realized the man sitting beside her had locked the door before Hollis Ashford's hand had ever touched the glass. He opened his own door, stepped out, and positioned himself directly in front of the cab, standing squarely between her father and the truck door. What did you just say? His voice wasn't louder than the rain. I said the girl's already been paid for. This has nothing to do with you. The man stood silently, his dark eyes fixing on Gantry's enforcer with an icy, unblinking glare that made the older man's breath catch. He wiped the rain from his face with the back of his hand, unhurried, radiating the quiet, lethal authority of a man who ruled the harbor in the shadows. "Human beings aren't cargo with a bill of lading, sir." One of Gantry's men let out a mocking laugh and stepped forward. "You're a delivery driver, aren't you? Then get back in your truck and finish your route. This is a family matter." He took another step. Then, behind the truck, the door of a black sedan that no one had noticed until that very moment quietly opened. Two men stepped out. They didn't say a single word. They didn't move forward. They simply stood there beneath the rain with their arms hanging loosely at their sides, watching. Gantry's man turned to look at the sedan. His eyes fell on the license plate. Then he took one step backward. Only one. A tiny movement, so slight that almost no one noticed it, but Delaney did. And for many months afterward, every time she closed her eyes, she saw that single step retreating through the rain. The atmosphere along the street shifted, though no one could have explained why. Marlowe's father was the first to break the silence, and his voice had changed. It was higher now, sharper, carrying the strain of a man who'd suddenly realized he was no longer in control. "Fine. If you want to keep her, then keep her. But Mr. Gantry spent $210,000 on this wedding, on the hospital bills, and on the debt at the shipyard. Can you pay that? Can a freight driver like you afford that?" The man pulled his phone from the pocket of his jacket. He didn't argue. He simply unlocked the screen and slowly typed in the amount he'd just heard, one digit at a time, with the same careful precision someone might use while recording a delivery scheduled for that day. Then he slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked directly into her father's eyes. "I've written it down." Hollis Ashford waited for a promise, a threat, something, anything at all. But the man had already turned away, opened the cab door, and settled behind the steering wheel. The truck rolled forward through a gap that the three vehicles had somehow, for reasons no one understood, quietly made for it. Marlowe sat in silence with both hands clasped tightly in her lap, before asking her very first question since climbing into the truck. "What's your name?" "Cassius." She waited for him to say more, but he never spoke another word. The diner sat at the very end of a row of buildings where nearly every light had already gone dark, and the woman behind the counter glanced at Marlowe's soaking wet wedding dress only once, before pouring coffee into 2 mugs, as though every evening a runaway bride wandered in and sat at one of her tables. Cassius pulled out a chair for Marlowe before taking the seat across from her. He ordered a bowl of soup without asking whether she wanted anything to eat. When the soup arrived, Marlowe picked up the spoon and never paused until the bowl was empty. And throughout the entire meal, Cassius kept his face turned toward the window, not because there was anything worth seeing outside, but because he understood there were moments when people needed to eat without anyone watching them. She finally set the spoon down. "Thank you. What do you need?" The question came so quickly that Marlowe blinked in surprise. She'd prepared herself for sentences like, "I'm sorry for spilling your cargo," or "Let me pay you back," or "I'll leave right now." None of those words fit anymore. "Safety," she answered. "Not another owner." "What's the difference?" "An owner gives me a place to sleep, then expects me to spend the rest of my life feeling grateful for it." Cassius looked at her for exactly 3 seconds. "I understand." He slowly turned the coffee mug once in his hand before continuing in the calm, measured voice of a man laying out contract terms, rather than sharing something personal. "I have a problem that needs solving too. My mother wants me to get married, but she doesn't want me to marry just anyone. She wants me to marry one specific woman." "Who?" "The Castellane family's daughter." Marlowe had never heard the name before. "Does your mother like her that much?" "She's never asked what the girl likes. To my mother, marriage isn't about 2 people. It's about 2 family names." He placed the mug back on the table. "She's already started choosing the wedding date. Once my mother sets a date, nobody in my family argues with her anymore. But there's one thing she can't undo, and that's a marriage certificate that's already been signed. If I'm already legally married, she'll have to wait at least 1 year before bringing it up again." Marlowe sat in silence for a long time. Outside, the rain had almost stopped. "You're asking me to marry you. I'm asking us to sign a piece of paper. You need a door that locks. I need a signature. This isn't kindness, so don't mistake it for kindness." It was that last sentence that made her believe him. If he'd said it was because he felt sorry for her, she would have stood up and walked straight out the door. "What do you do for a living?" "I haul freight." "What kind of freight?" Other people's. Marlo waited. He said nothing more. Years later, when she looked back on that night, she'd realize he hadn't lied by even a single word. He'd simply stopped speaking at exactly the moment when the whole truth should have continued. Who were those two men behind your truck this morning? They work for my company. A delivery company that has guards? Some shipments carry high risk, Cassius said softly, his dark eyes lingering on hers. And in my line of work, we don't allow anyone to touch what belongs to us. She looked at him. He met her eyes without looking away, just as it had happened at the street corner. Neither of them explained anything. Marlo lifted her coffee mug, took a sip that had already gone cold, then set it back down. She thought about the rented room she'd lose the following month. She thought about her name sitting beneath a mountain of hospital bills she still wouldn't finish paying by the time she turned 40 years old. She thought about her father knocking 3 times against the truck window. All right, but I have conditions. Let's hear them. First, separate rooms. I sleep in my room. You sleep in yours. That isn't open for discussion. He nodded. Second, I find my own job. You don't get me work. You don't call anyone. You don't ask anyone for favors. If I can't earn a living on my own, then I'll go hungry, but I won't take charity. He nodded again, this time more slowly. Third, every debt in my name belongs to me. I pay it, not you. I never want someone pointing at me one day and saying another person bought my life. What about the $210,000? That's money my father accepted, not money I spent. I'm not paying that. For the first time that entire evening, something flickered at the corner of Cassius's eyes. Almost a smile, though it disappeared before it could fully become one. What happens after 1 year? After 1 year, we each go our own way. You won't owe me anything. I won't owe you anything. Neither of us has to pretend to be sad. And if you change your mind sometime during that year, I'll still leave. He fell silent. Marlo understood he was weighing the decision, and she understood something else as well, that if she gave him another 30 seconds to think, everything might fall apart. She reached her hand across the table between the 2 mugs of cold coffee. Then shake my hand before either one of us comes to our senses. Cassius looked at her hand. It was the hand of a 27-year-old woman, her fingernails cut short, the back of her hand marked by an old burn from an oven, still trembling ever so slightly. It was the first time in many years that he'd hesitated before making a decision. Then he took her hand. Nell Rhodes opened the door at nearly 11 o'clock that night. She looked at Marlo standing there in a wedding dress that had dried stiff after the rain. Then at the unfamiliar man standing 1 step behind her, and she didn't ask a single question. She simply pulled Marlo inside, closed the door, and walked straight into the back room. When she returned, she was carrying a dented tin box with one corner crushed in. Inside were Marlo's birth certificate, her expired driver's license, her social security card, and Elliot Rhodes's death certificate, all stacked neatly in the exact order Nell had arranged them 14 months earlier and hadn't touched ever since. I've been keeping these for you since that day, Nell said quietly. I knew the day would come when you'd need them. Marlo took the tin box into her hands and couldn't find the words to speak. Nell turned toward Cassius. She looked at him for a long time, longer than courtesy required, with the steady gaze of a 71-year-old woman who'd buried her husband, buried her son, and no longer had anything left to lose by looking another person directly in the eye. What are you planning to do with this girl? Nothing, he answered. That's exactly what she needs. Nell gave a slow nod. If you're lying to me, I won't live long enough to come after you, but she will. The following morning, at the City Hall marriage license office, they filled out 2 applications side by side. Their witness was a 61-year-old man named Booker Ferris, his hair completely white, already waiting in the hallway before they arrived. He didn't ask Marlo a single question, but when Cassius lowered his head to sign his name, Booker leaned slightly closer and lowered his voice until only the 2 of them could hear. Are you sure about this? No, Booker said nothing more. He simply picked up the pen and signed his own name in the witness line, and the slow, deliberate weight of every stroke looked like the signature of a man who understood he was placing his name on something that would change the lives of many people. Marlo signed last. She wrote her name, set the pen down, then looked up at both men. In 2 days, I almost got married twice. At least this time it's legal. No one laughed, but Booker turned his face away, and Marlo caught the brief flicker of him blinking. The house stood along the bay, about 20 minutes from downtown, its windows looking directly over the water. Marlowe stopped at the entrance and couldn't bring herself to take another step. Whose house is this? My employer's. He's away. For how long? A long time. She walked through every room without touching a single thing. Inside the kitchen sat an almost empty refrigerator. Marlowe tore a page from a notebook, wrote 3 lines across it in block capital letters, then taped it to the refrigerator door. The first line read, "Separate bedrooms." The second, "I find my own job." The third, "Whoever owns the debt pays the debt." Cassius read the 3 lines without changing a single word, and for the next year, that note remained exactly where she'd placed it. Their first dinner in the house consisted of sliced bread and a pot of soup Marlowe made from whatever groceries she could buy with the handful of loose change left inside the borrowed coat Nell had lent her. She placed the bowl in front of him and spoke before embarrassment could catch up with her. "This is all I've got." Cassius pulled out his chair and sat down. He finished every spoonful of soup, then ate the last 2 slices of bread, leaving not a single drop behind in the bowl. Much later, Marlowe would learn it was the first home-cooked meal he'd eaten in 7 years. "I'll pay you back every penny," she said. "This house, yesterday's truck, this bowl of soup, everything. Find a job first, then we can argue about money. You say that like I'll find one right away. A woman who runs barefoot down the street the way you did yesterday will." That night Marlowe lay in the bedroom at the end of the hallway with the door locked, her hand still wrapped tightly around Nell's dented tin box. And she realized it was the first night since Elliot died that she'd slept in a room where no one had the right to open the door and walk inside. Just before 1 o'clock in the morning, she woke up thirsty. As she passed through the living room, she saw Cassius standing outside on the porch with his back turned toward the house, a phone pressed against his ear. He wasn't pacing, he wasn't gesturing, he simply stood there in complete stillness, listening for a long time while the water beyond the porch stretched into darkness. Then he spoke exactly 3 words. "Take care of it." He ended the call. Marlowe quietly stepped back into the shadows, her heart suddenly racing without knowing why, and she told herself it was probably about freight. Probably a damaged shipment, probably a delivery running late somewhere in the city. She poured herself a glass of water, drank every drop, then returned to her room and locked the door once again. Outside on the porch, Cassius remained standing there for a long while longer, staring out across the dark water without making another call. The job announcement was tucked inside a stack of advertising flyers that Marlowe picked up from the counter at the bakery where she worked the night shift, and she read it 3 times before bringing it home. The Rourke Hospitality Baking Apprenticeship Program was accepting applications for 10 days. Trainees would be paid throughout the entire course, and on the final line, printed in smaller letters than anything else on the page, was the number that made her quietly set the paper back on the table. The previous year, 4,000 people had applied. They accepted 12. She sat in front of the application for 2 evenings, without managing to write more than 3 lines. On the 3rd night, Cassius came home and found the application exactly where she'd left it. "Why haven't you submitted it? I'm afraid." He hung his jacket on the hook before turning back to look at her. "Then be afraid, but submit it anyway. Do you know how many 4,000 people really are? They have degrees, they have formal training, they have restaurants standing behind them. I dropped out of nursing school. I work the night shift in a bakery with 3 ovens, and I haven't earned a single certificate in 4 years. What do you have?" Marlowe fell silent for a moment. "I have 11 notebooks." "What kind of notebooks?" "Notes. Every batch of bread or pastry I ruined, I wrote down exactly what went wrong, what temperature I used, how long I left it in the oven. I've been doing that for 4 years. Cassius pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "Then don't write in your application that you want to learn the trade. Write that you've been teaching yourself for 4 years, and that you have 11 notebooks to prove it." That night, after Marlowe had turned off the light in her room, Cassius stepped out onto the porch and made a phone call. He said it only once, without repeating himself, without offering an explanation. "There's one name on the list of applicants for the baking program. Don't let anyone on the selection committee know who she is, including me. If I ask about her later, don't answer me." The voice on the other end asked one question. What if she doesn't make it? Then she doesn't make it. He ended the call, and inside the house overlooking the bay, no one heard a single word of that conversation. Marlowe submitted her application on the 9th day. 3 weeks later, she was still working the night shift, still coming home at 4 o'clock every morning, and still hadn't received a reply. Then, one night near the end of the month, as she pushed open the bakery door, her parents were waiting beneath the streetlight across the road. Bernadette stepped toward her first. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't blame her. She didn't mention what had happened that morning. She simply reached up, gently brushed her daughter's hair back, and began to cry with the sweetest voice Marlo had ever heard in her life. "You've gotten so thin. I look at you, and I haven't slept through a single night. Do you know how many times I've called, and you never answered? I wasn't calling to argue with you. I just wanted to know whether you were still alive." Marlo stood perfectly still while her mother stroked her hair. She knew what was coming, and she knew that the hardest thing in the world to resist wasn't anger. Hollis stepped forward more slowly, holding a sheet of paper folded into quarters. He didn't say a word. He simply unfolded it and placed it on the outdoor table beneath the bakery light, where his daughter could read every line clearly. Notice of foreclosure for the Ashford Ship Repair Yard. The seizure date was printed on the final line, exactly 5 weeks away. "I'm not asking you for money," he said quietly. "I know you don't have any. I'm only asking you for 1 week. 1 week for what? Mr. Gantry says he'll still keep his word. You go back, have 1 meal with him, let people take a few photographs, and he'll withdraw the foreclosure. Just 1 week. After that, you can go wherever you want. I won't stop you." Bernadette took her daughter's hand. 40 years, sweetheart. That shipyard is 40 years of your father's life. He built it before you were born, before your little sister ever existed." Marlo stared at the paper for a long time. She thought about those afternoons when she'd sat inside the shipyard at 7 years old, surrounded by the smell of machine oil and the ringing sound of hammers, while her father, wearing his old cloth cap, bent down and asked her to hand him the wrench. She let herself stay with that memory just long enough before gently slipping her hand free from her mother's grasp. "Go home." "What did you just say?" "I said go home." She picked up the paper, folded it carefully along the same worn creases, then slid it back across the table toward her father. "I'll pay every debt that belongs to me, every single dollar. It doesn't matter how many years it takes. But I won't pay with myself." Hollis stared at the folded paper lying in front of him without reaching for it. Bernadette stopped crying almost instantly, so quickly that Marlo understood those tears had been prepared before they'd ever left the house. And as she turned her back and walked away, her mother called after her with only one sentence, still using that voice as sweet as honey. "One day you'll understand, sweetheart. Strangers never keep someone else's daughter forever." Delaney arrived on a Saturday afternoon and stood outside the gate with both arms wrapped around a faded cardboard box, remaining there long enough for Marlo to see her younger sister through the kitchen window before she could decide whether she should go out and open the gate at all. "Please don't close the door yet," Delaney said the moment the gate opened a crack. "I didn't come because of Mom and Dad. I came because of me." Marlo said nothing. "I had a fight with Dad the day before yesterday. A bad one. Mom cried all night. I told him that workshop belongs to him, not to you. And he has no right to use your life to keep it standing." She said it all in one breath, her voice trembling slightly, her eyes red in a way that felt neither exaggerated nor rehearsed. "I couldn't stand up for you on that street corner that day. I stood there and watched, and I couldn't say a single word. I'm sorry." Marlo opened the gate. Delaney stepped inside and held out the box with both hands. "I helped Grandma Nell clean out her storage room last week. She said these were Elliot's things, that they'd been sitting there too long, and whoever wanted them could keep them. I thought you should." Marlo took the box. It was lighter than she had expected. She looked down at the lid, at the strip of old tape that had yellowed with time, and felt something rise inside her chest that she didn't want her sister to see. She carried the box into the house, opened the cabinet in the corner of the living room, pushed it all the way to the back, and closed the door again. She didn't open it. She didn't ask what was inside. There are some things a person knows will leave them unable to rise for an entire week once they are opened, and Marlo still had to go to work the next morning. "You're not going to look?" "Another day." Delaney nodded, and she didn't ask again. Marlo poured her a glass of water and went into the kitchen for cake, and while she was gone, Delaney sat alone in the living room, with both hands resting on her knees, her gaze moving slowly around the room. 4 cameras were mounted along the fence, not the kind sold in ordinary stores, staggered so carefully that there wasn't a single blind spot between them. At the back gate, 2 men in plain clothes stood about 30 feet apart, neither smoking, speaking, nor looking at a phone. The garage door was open by no more than the width of a hand, and inside stood a dark-colored car of which Delaney could see only the lower part of one door. Yet even that small visible section was disturbingly thicker than the door of any ordinary car. She had sat inside plenty of wealthy homes. Wealthy homes had cameras. Wealthy homes had gardeners, pool cleaners, and housekeepers. Wealthy homes didn't have two men standing outside the back gate for 40 minutes without doing anything at all. Marlowe brought out the cake, and the two sisters sat and ate together as though it had been many years since they had last shared a table. Delaney asked about work, about the pastry program, about whether her sister had been able to sleep. She asked in a voice that sounded sincere, and perhaps in half of those questions, she truly was. Close to 6 o'clock, Delaney stood and said she should go. Marlowe walked her to the gate. Out on the street, a car had just pulled to the curb, and the man who stepped out to open the rear door had snow-white hair, a tall frame, a straight back, and the bearing of someone well past 60. He inclined his head very slightly to Marlowe, then stood waiting beside the open door. Delaney stopped. She remained perfectly still for exactly 3 seconds, and during those 3 seconds, something cold traveled the length of her spine. She had seen this man before. Not somewhere far away. 10 years earlier, when she was a 13-year-old girl sitting in the back seat of her father's car, the entire city had come to a stop for a funeral procession that stretched nearly 1.25 miles, car after car, police blocking every intersection, while her father shut off the engine and waited for 20 full minutes without daring to touch the horn even once. The man driving the first car that day had been this same silver-haired old man. His hair hadn't been completely white then, but the way he sat hadn't changed. The whole city of Providence still remembered that funeral. Delaney even remembered the name her father had spoken softly inside the car that day, the way people speak a sentence they know should never be said aloud. "Marlowe," she said, turning toward her sister, her voice so ordinary that even she was surprised by it. "Who's that older gentleman?" "Mr. Booker. He drives for Cassius's company." "Oh," Delaney smiled. "Take care of yourself." She got into her own car and drove away, and she didn't turn on the music for the entire ride home. Booker Ferris. She needed only one name. One name was enough to begin pulling at the thread, and Delaney knew exactly where she was going to start. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, tucked between 2 utility bills, and Marlowe nearly let it fall to the floor with the pile of advertisements. She read the first line, stopped, then started again from the beginning. It wasn't until the 3rd time that she truly understood what she was holding in her hands. "Dear Miss Marlowe Ashford, the admissions committee is pleased to inform you that you have been accepted into this year's pastry training program, ranking 5th among the 12 successful applicants." She sat down on the front step with the letter in her hand and couldn't rise again for a very long time. For the past 4 years, whenever anyone asked what she did for a living, she had always answered that she worked the night shift at a bakery, and she always said it quickly, just to get it over with, as though she were apologizing. Now, on this piece of paper, someone had written her name in 5th place out of 4,000 people, and no one on that committee even knew who she was. Cassius came home that evening and found the letter propped upright on the kitchen table. He read it, set it down, then went straight to the cabinet and took out a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. Marlowe looked at the label. She had once sold that wine at a checkout counter when she was working a second job, and she remembered its price very clearly. "You have more money than this bottle," she said. "I do." "Then why open this one?" Cassius poured 2 glasses. "Because I don't want you to remember tonight because of the bottle. I want you to remember it because of the number 5. He slid 1 glass toward her. "Congratulations." Marlowe picked it up but didn't drink. "Why aren't you surprised?" "Do I need to be?" 4,000 people, Cassius. 4,000. Cassius took a sip, then set his glass down. "I once watched you run barefoot through the street in the rain. What's difficult about 12 places?" Marlowe turned her face away, and it took her nearly 3 seconds before she could speak again. "You make that sound too easy. I say it because I believe it." She finished that glass of inexpensive wine, and many years later, when the house held bottles that cost 50 times as much, she would still remember the taste of that exact one. 3 weeks later, Marlowe walked into the main kitchen of Rourke Hospitality at 5 o'clock in the morning as she did every day, and on the seasonal menu board hanging above the row of steel tables, she saw the name of her pastry. It had the exact filling she had failed to perfect 19 times over 4 years. The exact sugar ratio she had lowered 3 times in succession before finding the flavor she wanted. the exact method of baking at 2 temperatures that had taken 6 burned batches for her to understand. Beneath the name of the pastry, on the line identifying its creator, was someone else's name, Odalis Pruitt. Marlowe stood staring at the board long enough for the head pastry chef to walk past and stop behind her. "Is there a problem?" "This is my pastry." Odalis Pruitt didn't look offended, and she didn't look embarrassed. She simply gazed at the board beside Marlowe, as though the two of them were studying a painting in a museum. "You're a trainee. Everything you create in this kitchen belongs to the department. Did you read the contract?" "I did." "Then you understand." She had taken 3 steps away when she stopped. "Do you know how many people apply each year for the place where you're standing?" "A great many. Don't confuse talent with a seat at the table. Everyone has a little talent. There are only 12 seats." Marlowe didn't argue. She retied her apron, walked to her station, and worked until the end of her shift. But that night, when she returned home, she didn't go to bed right away. She took her 11th notebook from the drawer, opened it to the first blank page, and began to write. She recorded all 19 failed attempts again, including the dates, the oven temperatures, the weight of every ingredient in grams, and even the note she had hurriedly scribbled in the margin on that winter night 2 years earlier, when the 19th batch had finally come out with exactly the right flavor. At the bottom of the page, she wrote down that day's date. She wrote down the time as well. Then she closed the notebook, placed it in the drawer beside the other 10, and turned off the light. Cassius had been standing in the kitchen doorway for some time. "What happened?" "Nothing. Just a habit." "What kind of habit?" Marlowe pushed the drawer closed. "Writing everything down. The date, the time, what I did. I've been doing it for 4 years. She walked past him into the hallway, then stopped. "At the old bakery, they once blamed me for ruining an order of wedding pastries. I opened my notebook, pointed to the date and time, and they had no choice but to be quiet. I've written everything down ever since." Cassius watched her until she disappeared at the end of the hallway. Then he looked at the closed drawer, and he said nothing. The next morning, Cassius was awake before she was. When Marlowe came into the kitchen, he was standing beside the table with his phone in his hand, and she understood what was about to happen before he even had time to unlock the screen. "You already know." "I've known since last night." "Who told you?" "No one. You were writing down 19 failed attempts in that notebook at nearly 2 o'clock in the morning. People don't write like that unless something has happened." He opened his contacts. "What's her name?" Marlowe stepped closer and placed her hand over his wrist. She didn't snatch the phone away. She didn't raise her voice. She simply rested her hand there and held it still. "Don't." "What do you think I'm going to do?" "I don't know what you're going to do, but I know what will happen afterward." She withdrew her hand. "I'll walk into the kitchen tomorrow morning, and the name on the menu board will have changed. No one will explain why. Mrs. Pruitt will stand there looking at me, and she'll understand. Then everyone else will understand too. The other 11 people in my class will understand. From that day on, no matter how good anything I bake may be, there will always be someone in that kitchen thinking to themselves that girl has someone powerful behind her." Cassius said nothing. "Do you know what the hardest part of being married to a man with money is? It isn't that people envy you. It's that sooner or later, you stop knowing what you've accomplished through your own strength." She looked directly into his eyes. "If you fix this for me, then I'll always be somebody's wife, never a pastry chef." The kitchen remained silent for a very long time. Cassius had lived 34 years. In all those 34 years, no one had ever stood in front of him and told him not to use what he possessed. People came to him to beg him to use it. People called him in the middle of the night and pleaded with him to use it. Some had knelt in the very room less than 20 yards from where he now stood, begging him to use it for them just once. No one had ever told him not to. He locked the phone screen. Then he placed the phone face down on the table and pushed it a hand's breadth beyond his reach. "All right." Marlowe looked at the phone lying face down on the table, and her throat tightened for a reason that felt entirely unreasonable. She didn't understand why. She only knew that it was the first time in 14 months that a man had done exactly what she had asked, without explaining himself, bargaining with her, or demanding something in return. "Go to work," he said. "You'll be late." That night, after Marlowe had fallen asleep, Cassius went out onto the porch and sat down on the steps. He remained there for a long time, neither smoking nor drinking, his phone still in his pocket. Close to 1 o'clock in the morning, Booker Ferris brought the car back and saw that the porch light was still on. He walked up, stopped a few steps away from Cassius, and asked nothing. He waited. "You already know what happened in the main kitchen." "I do," Booker said. "Hardly anyone in this city knows what's written on that menu board, and yet I still know. That tells you enough other people know as well. What do you think I should do?" "I don't think. I only wait for you to tell me where to drive." Cassius remained silent. Booker stood there a little longer. Then he understood, and it was only in that moment of understanding that he was truly stunned. He had driven for the young man's father for 22 years. Then he had driven for the young man himself for another 12. In all those 34 years, there had never been a single time when he had stood waiting for an answer and received none. "You're truly going to leave it alone?" "I'm leaving it alone," Cassius said. He continued staring toward the black water beyond the house without turning his head. This time, Booker Ferris remained there for several more seconds. Then he nodded, though no one saw the gesture, and walked down the steps toward the garage. Halfway there, he stopped and turned back to look at the silent figure seated on the porch, and a thought came to him that he would never speak aloud to anyone, not even years later, after everything had already happened. He thought his young master had just begun losing something, and he didn't yet know that he was losing. Delaney took 11 days. She began with the name Booker Ferris, and she didn't search for it on a computer, because the things she needed to find weren't stored on computers. She went from person to person and asked questions. She spoke to an aunt who had once worked at a funeral home, but the woman could tell her only that the funeral that year had been for a very old man, and that the police had closed the roads that day without taking a single cent. She asked an acquaintance who worked as a court clerk, and when the woman heard the name Booker Ferris, she fell silent for exactly 4 seconds before telling Delaney not to ask any more questions. Those 4 seconds of silence were enough to tell Delaney she was moving in the right direction. At last, she found a retired man who had once supervised the night shift at the harbor. She sat with him for nearly 2 hours in a beer hall, paid for all 4 drinks, and asked him only one question: who decided which cargo was allowed through Pier 9? The man laughed. He told her that everyone in Providence knew the answer, but no one ever said it aloud. Then he gave her the family name, one name and no other, and he spoke it very softly. 3 days later, Delaney sat in Sterling Gantry's office on the 9th floor of a building, overlooking the bay. He prepared tea for her with his own hands. A courteous man of 59 whose manners were refined enough to make people forget whom they were speaking to. "What do you want from me, Miss Ashford?" "I want my father's shipyard to be spared from foreclosure." "I already made that offer. Your sister refused it." "I know. That's why I didn't bring my sister here today. I brought something else." Gantry sat down. "I'm listening. For the past 4 years, hasn't every shipment of yours come to a stop the moment it reaches the eastern entrance to the harbor?" The smile vanished from his face at once. It was the first time that entire afternoon Delaney saw the man he truly was, and she committed that face to memory. "Who told you that?" "No one told me. I was only asking." Gantry set down his teacup. 4 years. For 4 years, he hadn't been able to understand why. The paperwork had been complete. Every bribe had been paid, and his people inside the harbor authority had all been in place. Yet the moment anything reached Pier 9, everything stopped. Cargo was held for further inspection. Ships had their docking schedules changed. Cranes broke down during the night shift. Documents disappeared, and then somehow turned up again 3 weeks later. Not once had anyone shown their face. Not once had anyone demanded anything. It was as though some unseen hand had rested on his shoulder in the darkness, never tightening its grip, merely remaining there for 4 long years. He had spent a great deal of money trying to discover whose hand it was. "What do you know?" Delaney set down her tea carefully, placing the cup precisely where it belonged. "My sister married a man. He told her he works in shipping. His house has 4 cameras along the fence, men guarding the back gate all day, and a car with doors twice as thick as ordinary car doors. And the man who drives for him is Booker Ferris." She spoke the family name. She said it plainly and clearly, without lowering her voice. Sterling Gantry sat motionless for a very long time. Then he leaned back in his chair and laughed, a short, dry sound with no trace of amusement in it. "You've just given me what I've been searching for all these 4 years. And my father's shipyard? Your father won't lose the shipyard." He poured her more tea. "But you need to understand something, Miss Ashford. From the moment you walk out that door, There will be no turning back. Do you understand? I understand. Delaney drove home in the fading afternoon light. She didn't turn on the music. When she reached the middle of the bridge, she pulled over, shut off the engine, and sat there looking at the water. She thought of her father sitting in that shipyard for 40 years, his hands forever stained with oil no matter how often he washed them. She thought of her mother counting grocery money in the kitchen. She thought of her sister sleeping in a house by the bay with 4 cameras, sharing meals with a man whose true identity she didn't know, protected, secure, admitted to a training program 4,000 people had wanted to enter. Her sister had everything. The shipyard had only 5 weeks left before it was gone. Alone inside the car, Delaney spoke aloud so she could hear the words clearly. I'm doing this for the whole family. Then she started the engine and drove on. She believed what she had just said. She would go on believing it for a very long time, right up until the day when everything had already become too late. The corporation's anniversary celebration was held in the grand ballroom of a hotel overlooking the bay. And Marlo went there alone by bus, getting off at the final stop and walking another 4 blocks because she didn't want anyone to see her stepping away from the bus station. Cassius had told her he had business that evening and would arrive later. She wore the only black dress she owned, the one she had worn to Elliot's funeral, and she had stood in front of the mirror for a very long time, trying to convince herself that no one would recognize it. There were nearly 400 people in the ballroom. Odalis Pruitt sat at the second table with her back to Marlo. The host began reading the names of the dishes selected for the seasonal menu, and when he reached the almond-filled pastry baked at 2 temperatures, he paused, looked down at the page, then read out a name. Marlo Ashford, first-year trainee. She remained seated for 2 full seconds before realizing they were calling her. Odalis Pruitt turned around very quickly, and in that brief instant, Marlo saw something on the woman's face that she hadn't managed to hide in time. Marlo rose, walked toward the stage, and clasped her hands tightly together. The host continued, his voice lifting by a degree. And now, please welcome the chairman of the corporation to present the certificate to our trainee. The entire ballroom rose. 400 people stood at once, the sound of chairs sliding backward together like one enormous sigh, and applause rose from the far end of the room and rolled all the way to the ceiling. Marlo turned her head toward the side entrance. Cassius stepped out. He wore a black suit without a tie, moving slowly, and he walked through those 400 standing, applauding people as though he were passing through an empty corridor. No one offered another word of introduction. No one needed one. Marlo stood motionless on the stage. She didn't applaud. She didn't step back. She simply stood there with her hands still clasped together, hearing the applause as though it were rising toward her from beneath the water. He climbed the steps and presented the certificate to her with both hands. Camera flashes burst 4 or 5 times. "Congratulations," he said, softly enough that only she could hear. Marlo took the paper. She looked down at it. Then she raised her head and smiled at the room, the kind of smile a person is expected to give when 400 people are watching, and she held that smile until she had stepped down from the final stair. She went out into the hallway. Cassius followed about a minute later. "Marlo." She turned around. "The house? Mine. The car? Mine. The $210,000? I paid it in the 2nd week." She nodded. "That cheap bottle of wine that night? I chose it on purpose. I know. But back then, I thought you chose it because you couldn't afford a more expensive one." Cassius said nothing. 4 months, Marlo said. "For 4 months, I took the bus to the morning shift. I counted the coins in my coat pocket before I got on. One day I was 75 cents short, so I walked for 20 minutes. You stood at the door and watched me leave through the gate. You watched every morning. I remember. You let me tell you I would repay every cent. I said it in your kitchen, standing right in front of you, with a bowl of soup made from loose change. I remember. Then why didn't you tell me? I was afraid you'd leave if you knew. Fear doesn't turn a lie into kindness." Cassius had no answer to that. "I never lied to you," he said. "Not once." "That's true," Marlo said. "You only stopped at exactly the right place. Every time, you stopped at exactly the right place. Do you know that makes it worse?" Music drifted into the hallway from the ballroom, along with the chime of glasses and the sound of someone laughing loudly. "I was so proud," she said, her voice perfectly ordinary, and it was that very ordinariness that made it unbearable for him. "For the entire past month, I kept thinking about the number 5. 4,000 people. and I ranked 5th. I thought, so I can still do something after all. I slept well for 3 straight weeks. She looked down at the certificate in her hands. Now I'm holding this paper, and I don't know whether it belongs to me or to someone else anymore. It belongs to you. I swear. You swear, Marlo repeated. Do you know where the problem is? The problem is that from tonight on, I'll have to believe your oath. Before this, I didn't have to. She folded the certificate in half, then folded it into quarters and slipped it into her coat pocket. I'm going home first. Let me have Booker drive you. No. She walked toward the door. I still have bus fare. For the next 3 days, they lived beneath the same roof and barely spoke a word to each other. Marlo still woke at 4 o'clock, still walked through the gate at 4:30, and still took the bus. In the evenings, she came home, cooked dinner, left his portion in the oven, then went into her room and closed the door. Cassius didn't knock once. Every morning, he woke before she did and stood at the kitchen window, watching her walk out through the gate, exactly as he had for the past 4 months, except now she knew he was standing there. On the morning of the 4th day, Marlo came into the kitchen and found him already seated at the table, both hands resting in front of him, no phone, no papers, nothing at all. She poured herself a cup of coffee, then poured another, and placed it before him. She sat across from him. I have a question. Ask it. It isn't about the money. I've already said everything I had to say about the money. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. Other than the restaurant chain, what do you do at the harbor? Cassius didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the tabletop for a long time, and Marlo realized that this time he wasn't searching for a way to leave something out. He was searching for a way to say everything. My family has 4 companies registered under its name: transportation, restaurants, warehousing, and a small insurance brokerage. All 4 companies are legitimate, pay their taxes in full, and undergo an audit every year. I'm not asking about those 4 companies. I know. He looked up. There are 7 piers on the eastern side of the harbor, from Pier 6 to Pier 9. Not a single piece of cargo passes through without my family knowing about it. Not because we own those piers, but because for the past 30 years, the people who decide what is allowed through and what isn't have all belonged to my family. Who gave your family that authority? No one gave it to us. My grandfather took it in 1962. My father held it. I inherited it at 27, on the day they buried my father. Marlo sat perfectly still. Then what are you? What name do you want me to call it? The name people use for you behind your back. Cassius looked directly at her. Then call me by that name. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen, and the sound suddenly seemed strangely loud. Marlo didn't rise. She didn't scream. She didn't break anything. She simply sat there, both hands still wrapped around the cup of coffee that had already gone cold. And she remained that way for a very long time, long enough for Cassius to begin thinking she would never speak again. She was thinking about very small things. She thought of the 2 men who had stood in the rain on that street corner without saying a word. She thought of the step backward taken by Gantry's man, a gesture she still hadn't understood. She thought of the 3 words spoken on the porch at 1 o'clock in the morning, and of how, for 4 months, she had kept telling herself it was only about cargo. She thought of how soundly she had slept in this house, more soundly than anywhere she had slept since Elliot died. Then she thought of Elliot. You said Pier 6 through Pier 9. Yes, Pier 9. Marlo set down her coffee cup. She placed it very gently on the table, but when her hand left the cup, it was trembling. Elliot died at Pier 9. Cassius didn't move. He was a harbor safety inspector. He worked the night shift on the 11th of August last year. They called me at 4 o'clock in the morning. The report said it was an industrial accident. A crane, a cable, 3 lines, a signature, a stamp. I asked questions. They told me things like that happened all the time at the harbor, and that I should start thinking about moving on with my life. She looked up. For 14 months, I've carried those 3 lines in my head. Only 3 lines. They wrote an entire human life in 3 lines. Cassius remained motionless. You said not a single piece of cargo passes through Pier 9 without your family knowing, Marlo said. What about a man dying there? He didn't answer. He opened his mouth, then said nothing at all. In 34 years, there had never been a question for which Cassius Rourke didn't already have an answer. Not even the questions people asked him with trembling hands. Not even the questions after which they no longer dared to look him in the eye. He always had something to say. Now he sat before a woman who was waiting, and he had nothing. The silence lasted perhaps 15 seconds. But those 15 seconds were enough for Marlowe to understand something she wouldn't speak aloud for many weeks afterward. He hadn't said no. She stood, poured the cold coffee into the sink, washed the cup, placed it upside down on the rack, then went to get her coat. "I've missed my bus." Isadora Rourke arrived on a Tuesday afternoon without warning, and Marlowe knew who she was before the woman had even crossed the threshold, because Booker Ferris walked ahead to open the door for her, and he bowed his head in a way Marlowe had never seen him bow to anyone else. She entered at 63 years old, her back straight, her steps unhurried, and she surveyed the living room once with the air of someone taking inventory of her own property. Following behind her was a woman about 2 years younger than Marlowe, her hair neatly tied back, a small bouquet in her hands. She held out the flowers and thanked Marlowe for allowing them to visit so unexpectedly, her voice gentle, and she spoke with such genuine sincerity that Marlowe accepted the bouquet and felt something inside her chest quietly sink. Genevieve Castellane didn't say another word for the rest of that afternoon. Cassius came home 10 minutes later. He stopped in the doorway when he saw his mother seated in the armchair. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see whether this house is still breathing." Isadora settled back and placed her handbag on her lap. "Sit down. I'll say this once, and then I'll leave." She turned toward Marlowe. "You sit down too. This concerns you more than it concerns him." Marlowe sat on the edge of the chair across from her. "Your name is Marlowe Ashford." "Yes, ma'am." "You're 27 years old, widowed. Your father is about to lose his shipyard. Your mother cries often, and I don't know enough about your younger sister yet. You're training to become a pastry chef." She recited these things as though she were reading from a formal report. "I don't mean to insult you. I only want you to understand that I've looked into you, and everything I found is true." "Yes, ma'am." "Then you also understand why I'm sitting here." Isadora opened her handbag, took out a check that had already been filled in, folded it in half, and placed it on the table between them, before gently pushing it toward Marlowe. "You're a charming accident. I won't deny that. One look at you is enough to know you're kind. But my son doesn't need a kind woman. He needs an alliance. He needs another name beside our family name, so the people waiting for our family to stumble will think twice. He doesn't need a sad story." "Mother," Cassius said, "be quiet." She never took her eyes off Marlowe. "Take this money, pay your father's debts, pay your medical bills, and open a bakery wherever you please. You're 27. You still have an entire life ahead of you. I'm not throwing you into the street. I'm returning you to the place where you belong." Marlowe looked at the folded check lying on the table. She looked at it for exactly 1 second, then no longer. Then she stood. The entire room went silent because no one knew what she intended to do. She walked into the kitchen. She took out the teapot, rinsed it with boiling water, poured the water away, added the tea, waited long enough, then poured it into a cup. She took a saucer, placed the cup upon it, turned the handle toward the seated woman's right hand, and carried it out with both hands. She set it in front of Isadora Rourke, not on top of the check, but beside it. Then she stepped back half a pace, stood straight, and let her arms rest at her sides. Isadora looked at the cup of tea. She looked at the saucer. She looked at the handle turned in precisely the correct direction. For 30 years, she had taught that exact way of serving tea to countless people in her household, and she had once spent an entire summer arguing with her younger brother's wife over nothing more than the direction of a cup handle. She raised her eyes to the woman standing before her. "Who taught you to serve tea that way?" "Mrs. Nell Rhodes, ma'am. My former mother-in-law." Isadora said nothing. "Mrs. Rourke," Marlowe said, "I won't take that check. Not because I'm too proud. I'm poor, and poor people can't afford that much pride." She looked down at her. "I won't take it because you can't buy something you've never understood." Isadora remained still. She wasn't angry, and that was the strangest thing of all. She lifted the cup, took a sip, set it down, and looked at it longer than necessary. During that moment, only one person in the room was looking elsewhere. Genevieve Castellane wasn't watching the teacup. She was watching Cassius, and she saw that from the moment Marlowe rose and walked into the kitchen until the moment she placed that cup on the table, the man hadn't taken his eyes off her for even a second. It wasn't the gaze of someone worried about himself. It was the gaze of a man watching the most precious thing he possessed being appraised before his eyes while he remained powerless to stop it. Genevieve turned her face away. She was 29 years old, and she wasn't a fool. As she was leaving, Isadora stopped at the door. She picked up the check, folded it once more, and returned it to her handbag. "You serve tea very well," she said without turning around. "But don't misunderstand me. I haven't changed my mind." Ambrose Lynch had stood beside Cassius Rourke for 12 years, and in all those 12 years, he was the only person permitted to enter Cassius's office without knocking. He was 47 years old, the man who had carried Cassius into the car on the night his father died, the man who had sat beside him through all 3 days of the funeral without going home even once. So, when 4 shipments belonging to Gantry Maritime passed through Pier 9 on a Wednesday night without being reported, there was only one possible way it could have happened. Cassius learned about it on Friday morning. He didn't discover it through anything dramatic. He knew because the total weight listed in the weekly manifest was 120 tons higher than the number of shipments could account for, and he had read that manifest every Friday morning for 7 years. He called the man in charge of the night shift. The man hesitated for nearly 3 seconds before saying that Mr. Lynch had approved it. Cassius thanked him, ended the call, and didn't call anyone else. That afternoon, Ambrose Lynch came to the house as he did every Friday, carrying 2 folders and a box of pastries from a shop near the harbor. Cassius opened the door, nodded, accepted the 2 folders, and thanked him. Then he remained standing there with the files in his hands and didn't invite him inside. Ambrose waited. "Is there anything we need to discuss?" "No. There's a city inspection at Pier 7 next week, and I was planning to. Do whatever you believe is right." Ambrose Lynch stood there for several more seconds, then gave a strained little smile and left. Halfway home, he had to pull over, because in 12 years there had never been a single Friday afternoon when he had left without staying for at least 40 minutes. 3 weeks earlier, he had been the one to make a very short telephone call to a woman he had known since the days when she worked in the kitchen of a hotel near the docks. He told Mrs. Odalise Pruitt that a young woman wanted to meet her, that it was only a family matter, nothing serious, and that he personally vouched for the girl. Delaney Ashford met Mrs. Pruitt the following day, sat with her for 2 hours in a coffee shop, and by the time they left, the 2 women understood one another. Neither of them knew that the man who had brought them together worked for the same man who had paid both of them. After that Friday afternoon, Cassius never spoke to Ambrose Lynch again. He didn't reduce his salary. He didn't take back his keys. He didn't forbid him from coming. Ambrose continued moving through the organization, continued signing documents, continued sitting in his usual chair during meetings. The only difference was that Cassius no longer asked him a single question. During the second meeting of the following week, Ambrose spoke 3 times, and each time Cassius nodded, then turned and asked someone else. By the third meeting, 4 people in the room had noticed. By the second week, the entire organization had noticed. No one said it aloud, but the man in charge of the warehouses began sending his reports directly to Cassius instead of passing them through Ambrose. The night shift supervisor at Pier 9 requested 10 days of leave and left the city. 2 men who had often eaten lunch with Ambrose suddenly found themselves busy for an entire month. Ambrose Lynch still held the same title, still occupied the same seat, and yet he was slowly sinking into that seat, a little more each day, with no one pushing him. Booker Ferris brought the car back late one evening and found Cassius still sitting in the reading room with the desk lamp burning. He stood in the doorway. "How long are you going to let this continue? Until he walks himself to the place he needs to go. You aren't going to ask him a single question? What would be the point?" Cassius didn't lift his eyes from the papers in front of him. "If I ask, he'll deny it. Then I'll have to decide whether I believe him. Then the past 12 years will become 12 years I have to sit and weigh in my mind. I don't want that." Booker was silent for a moment. "He carried you into the car the night your father died." "I know. You still remember that, don't you? More clearly than you think." He turned another page. "That's precisely why I'm not asking." Booker Ferris remained in the doorway for a long while. He had lived 61 years, had driven for 2 generations of the family, and had witnessed enough that almost nothing could surprise him anymore. Yet that night, he felt something cold travel through his back. He had seen Cassius Rourke angry before. An angry man could still be reasoned with. "Young master," he said. "Yes. When your father was alive, whenever he shouted, I knew everything would eventually be all right." He looked at the silent figure seated beneath the desk lamp. "But you go quiet. When you go quiet, that's when people should be afraid." Marlowe was summoned to Human Resources on a Monday morning. and a printout from the access control system was already waiting on the table. An employee badge bearing the name Marlo Ashford had been scanned at the side entrance to the office wing at 11:48 on Thursday night. During that same period, the corporation's entire supplier list and internal pricing records had been copied from the server. 3 days later, a rival restaurant chain submitted bids exactly 3% lower to 9 of the suppliers on that list. Where were you at that time? I was at home. Can anyone verify that? Marlo fell silent for a moment. She knew exactly who could verify it, and she knew that one phone call would make the entire matter disappear before the afternoon was over. No, ma'am. That evening, Cassius read the summons lying on the kitchen table. When he finished, he set it down and didn't reach for his phone. He only looked at her. What do you want me to do? Nothing. Are you sure? I'm sure. Marlo pulled out a chair and sat down. If you make one call, this will disappear tomorrow, and for the rest of my life, I'll never know whether they believed I was innocent or whether they were simply afraid of my husband. And if you lose, then I'll lose under my own name. The disciplinary board met on Thursday morning, 5 people seated in a row, with Marlo alone on the opposite side. There was no attorney. She placed a stack of 11 notebooks on the table. What are these? My records. For 4 years, I've written down the date and time of everything I do. She opened the newest notebook. Thursday night, at 11:15, I wrote 2 lines about the 3rd test batch. At 11:40, I wrote the final line and went to bed. I know this doesn't prove anything, because I wrote the notebook myself. I only want you to understand that I'm someone who has a habit of keeping records. The person seated in the middle turned through several pages. What are you asking for? I'm requesting the security footage from the office parking lot on Thursday night, from 11:30 until midnight. The parking lot camera doesn't face the side entrance. I know, but anyone entering through the side door would have to pass through the parking lot first. She was given the footage the following afternoon. Marlo brought the computer home, sat at the kitchen table, and watched it alone. The recording was black and white, grainy, and moved very slowly as she advanced through it. At 11:34, a small car parked in the second row. Its lights went out, and no one stepped from it. At 11:45, a woman emerged from the direction of the building, walking with a gait Marlo recognized even though her face was nothing more than a gray blur. O'Daly's Pruitt approached the parked car, the driver's side window lowered by about a hand's breadth. A hand reached out from inside, holding a plastic card between 2 fingers. Mrs. Pruitt took the card, turned away, and walked toward the side entrance. The window rose again. Not once during the entire recording did the face of the person inside the car appear. Marlo rewound it. She played the moment again 4 times, then froze the image at the exact instant when the hand was still extended through the window. Around that wrist was a slender silver bracelet with a teardrop-shaped clasp, and on the 3rd link from the clasp was a small dent where it had once fallen onto a tiled floor. Marlo had bought that bracelet with her first month's wages when she was 22, and she had fastened it around her younger sister's wrist during Delaney's 18th birthday dinner. She sat perfectly still. She didn't cry. She didn't stand. She stared at the screen for the length of a single breath, then reached forward and closed the computer. On Monday morning, Marlo submitted the recording to the board, along with a sheet of paper bearing 2 times, 11:45 and 11:48. She said nothing else. Mrs. O'Daly's Pruitt was called into the room. She watched the entire recording, sat silently for 20 seconds, then said she had received the badge from an acquaintance who told her it was a spare departmental card, and that she hadn't known whose card it was. No one in the room believed her. The board concluded that Mrs. O'Daly's Pruitt had acted dishonestly in her use of internal access privileges, and terminated her employment that same day. The person in the middle turned toward Marlo. Do you know who was in the car? Marlo looked directly at him. The person's face isn't visible in the recording, sir. Did you recognize anything? No, sir. She left the meeting room at 10:15, took the stairs instead of the elevator, and walked down all 3 floors without stopping once. At noon, she returned to the main kitchen precisely when her shift began, tied on her apron, and worked until the end of the day. That evening, she took out her 11th notebook, wrote down the date, wrote down the time, recorded the board's decision in exactly 4 words, then closed the notebook. She didn't write a single word about the bracelet. The envelope was delivered to the bakery where Marlo worked the morning shift, not to the house. Her name was written on it, but there was no return address. Inside were 17 photocopied pages, the incident report from Pier 9 on the night of August 11th, a diagram showing the position of the crane, the inspection report for the cable, completed 9 days earlier, concluding that the equipment met safety standards. And on page 14, beneath the signature of the independent inspector, there was a name, a professional license number, and directly below them, the name of the company that had commissioned the inspection, a small insurance brokerage. Marlowe knew that name. She had heard Cassius himself speak it aloud in the kitchen of their home as he sat across from her on the morning of the 4th day and listed the 4 companies registered under his family's name. She sat in the bakery changing room for nearly 40 minutes, turning those 17 pages over and over, reading them so carefully that she noticed something she should have been relieved to see. The file wasn't complete. Page 15 jumped directly to page 18. The pages identifying who had requested the inspection, who had paid for it, and who had received the results were all missing. The documents proved only one thing, that the Rourke family's trail appeared on the paper that had reduced her husband's death to 3 lines describing an industrial accident. They didn't explain why that trail was there. Whoever had sent this envelope knew exactly what they were doing, and they had removed precisely the pages that might have allowed the story to be explained another way. Marlowe understood that. She still went home. Cassius was sitting at the kitchen table when she placed the papers in front of him. He read them. He read slowly, page by page, and he didn't ask where she had gotten them. When he reached page 14, he stopped much longer than he had on the others. "You recognize this signature, don't you?" "Yes." "Whose is it?" "It belongs to my family's company." "I didn't ask which company. I asked who." Cassius didn't answer that question. He folded the papers closed. "I need 3 days." "I didn't ask how many days you needed." Marlowe pulled out a chair and sat across from him. Her back was straight, both hands resting on the table. "And I'm not asking whether you did it. I know you didn't. I've lived beside you for 11 months. I know you aren't the kind of man who sits down and plans something like that." She looked directly into his eyes. "I'm asking something else. Your world, the world with 7 piers and 30 years and men who stand in the rain without needing to say a word, is that world capable of doing something like this?" Cassius sat motionless. "Tell me." "I can't tell you no." That was his entire answer. Marlowe nodded. She remained seated for another moment, then rose, went into her room, and began packing. She didn't own much. 2 bags, 1 tin box, 11 notebooks. Cassius stood in the doorway watching her pack, and he didn't step inside. "Where are you going?" "Mrs. Snell still has a room on the 3rd floor. I can." "Don't." Her hands stopped. "You're about to say something with the words 'I can' in it. Don't say it." He fell silent. "Do you know what frightens me most?" Marlowe folded her coat and placed it inside the bag. "It isn't who you are. It's that for the past 11 months, I've been growing smaller and smaller without realizing it. You didn't ask anyone to give me my job, but that entire building belongs to you. This house belongs to you. The car that took me to the doctor when I had a fever belongs to you. Even the reason I was able to prove my innocence was that I had somewhere safe to come home to afterward. I don't know what belongs to me anymore. What do you want me to do?" "Nothing." She closed the zipper on the bag. "That's the only thing you've never done for me." Cassius stepped back from the doorway. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't say a word about money, the house, protection, or any of the things he could have placed before her to make her stay. He simply moved aside, and in the 12 years he had held his world in his hands, it was the first time he chose not to use it. Marlowe carried her 2 bags into the living room. Isadora Rourke was sitting in the armchair, though no one knew when she had arrived, the cup of tea in front of her untouched. She looked at the 2 bags. She looked at her son standing in the hallway doorway with empty hands. Marlowe stopped before her. "Goodbye, Mrs. Rourke. I'm going home." She walked toward the door, then stopped and turned to look at Cassius one last time. "I haven't stopped loving you. I want you to know that, because someday people will tell this story differently." She continued, her voice perfectly calm. "If I ever come back, it has to be because I choose you, not because I have nowhere else to go." The door closed. Isadora Rourke remained seated in the armchair, staring at that door for a very long time. She had prepared 3 things to say when this moment came. She didn't say a single one. The room on the 3rd floor of Mrs. Snell Rhodes's house had 1 window, 1 bed, 1 table pushed against the wall, and hot water that took 4 minutes to reach the faucet. Marlowe woke at 3:30 in the morning, went downstairs to light the ovens, and worked the morning shift at the old woman's bakery. The bakery with 3 ovens that she had once spoken of evasively whenever anyone asked what she did for a living. She left the training program, writing a withdrawal letter exactly 5 lines long without explaining why. She went to the bank and signed a new repayment agreement for the medical debt in her own name, dividing it into 62 installments, each one costing nearly a third of her monthly wages. The employee looked at her and asked whether anyone would serve as her guarantor, and she said no. Cassius deposited money into her account twice during the first month. Both times, she transferred every cent back without including a message. By the third time, there was no third time. Mrs. Snell never asked what had happened. She simply cooked more rice, and every evening she left Marlowe a bowl of hot soup no matter how late she came home. In the 6th week, the old woman stood one evening in the bedroom doorway, looking at the faded cardboard box beneath the table, the box that had followed Marlowe from the house by the bay without being opened even once. "How long are you planning to leave it there?" "I can't open it yet, Grandma." "I know. I once had a box like that myself. I left it untouched for 2 years. Mrs. Snell entered and sat on the edge of the bed. "But child, the things that belong to someone who is gone will remain still forever, while you still have to keep living. Open it. I'll sit here with you." Marlowe pulled the box out and cut through the yellowed tape. On top lay a canvas jacket, the one Elliot had always worn on the night shift, folded clumsily by hands unaccustomed to folding a man's clothes. Beneath it were 2 hard hats, a box of pens, a broken wristwatch, and at the very bottom, pressed between 2 pieces of cardboard, 4 black-covered notebooks. Marlowe picked up the top one and opened it, and on the very first page, she recognized his handwriting. Slanting to the left, every capital letter larger than it needed to be. Elliot had also been someone who wrote everything down. She had learned that habit from him. The 4 notebooks contained continuous records from the final 2 years of his life. Dates, times, ship numbers, shipment numbers, declared weights, actual weights. On the early pages, Elliot had written only the bare facts. As the entries continued, notes he had written to himself began appearing in the margins. This shipment was declared at 40 tons, actual weight 22. This shipment was declared as machinery, but when opened, the containers were empty, shells packed with sand. The same owner, the same insurance company behind them. Gantry Maritime. Marlowe kept turning the pages, and her hands began to tremble. During the final 6 months, Elliot's notes became even more detailed, and he began recording names, who approved each shipment for passage, who signed the equipment inspection report, who put their name on the certificate declaring the cable safe so the shipment could be lifted the following day. The same name appeared 19 times throughout the 4 notebooks. Ambrose Lynch. On the final page containing writing, dated August 9th, 2 days before that night, Elliot had used a different colored pen, his handwriting far more hurried, as though he had written it quickly inside his car. "Mr. L doesn't work for the harbor. Mr. L works for G. The Rourke family doesn't know. I have to give this to someone higher up before anyone learns I'm holding it." Marlowe read those 4 lines 3 times. Then she lowered the notebook onto her lap and remained still for a very long time, while Mrs. Snell said nothing and simply rested a hand against her back. Ambrose Lynch had taken money from Sterling Gantry to allow falsely declared shipments through Pier 9. Elliot had traced them back to him. And just as Elliot was preparing to deliver these 4 notebooks to someone higher up, an inspection report had been created 9 days earlier, declaring the cable safe and bearing the signature of that same man, and 2 days later, her husband never came home. They wrote 3 lines, added a signature, and stamped the page. The Rourke name appeared on that document not because the Rourke family had given the order. It was there because someone had borrowed the Rourke family's hand, and that person had hidden the truth from the man who led the Rourke family for 14 long months. Marlowe raised her eyes to Mrs. Snell, and the first thing she said wasn't about Elliot. "My sister brought this box." The old woman nodded. "She brought it so she would have a reason to enter the house," Marlowe said, and she gave a brief laugh with no amusement in it. She had no idea what was inside. Marlowe wrapped all 4 notebooks in a cloth bag, walked to the telephone booth on the street corner at nearly 11 o'clock that night, and dialed the number she hadn't needed to look up once in 11 months. He answered on the first ring. "Marlowe, sit down," she said. "I found it, and you aren't going to like the name." Cassius read all 4 notebooks in a single night, sitting alone beneath the desk lamp, and he didn't call anyone until morning. At 7 o'clock, he made 3 calls. The first was to the financial manager of the Rourke family, and he asked only one question: who did Gantry Maritime owe money to? The answer was 4 banks and 2 private funds, totaling nearly $90 million, with 2 of those debts coming due within 5 weeks. His second call was to an investment company registered in Delaware, which was owned by another company registered in Rhode Island, which in turn belonged to a fund bearing Cassius's mother's family name. Within 4 days, that fund purchased every one of Gantry Maritime's debts that was approaching maturity, paying the full principal value in cash without bargaining over a single cent. No one at any of the 4 banks asked why someone was willing to purchase troubled debt at such a generous price. They were simply relieved to sell it. For his third call, Cassius contacted the man in charge of the Eastern Harbor entrance, and he spoke exactly 1 sentence. From this day forward, no shipment bearing the name Gantry Maritime or insured by Gantry Maritime was to pass through Pier 6 to Pier 9. The man asked how long the order would remain in effect. Cassius said forever. Sterling Gantry learned the news on Wednesday morning. By noon, 2 shipowners had canceled their contracts because their cargo was being held outside Buoy 3. By afternoon, 3 small businesses in the city had simultaneously issued notices terminating their insurance agreements. The following morning, Gantry Maritime's new creditor sent a written demand for the immediate repayment of the 2 debts approaching maturity, citing a breach of the clause requiring the company to maintain normal business operations. Gantry called his attorney at 9 o'clock that morning. The attorney carefully read the name of the party that had purchased the debt, remained silent for a long time, then advised his client to find another lawyer. 48 hours after the harbor entrance was closed, Gantry Maritime ceased operations. 2 days later, a file containing the original 4 notebooks belonging to Elliot Rhodes, together with records matching every shipment number against 4 years of customs, documents, and insurance claims, was submitted to the Regional Federal Prosecutor's Office. Cassius wasn't the person who submitted it. Marlo Ashford did, going alone with a cloth bag in her hands, and she sat in the prosecutor's office for nearly 3 hours, answering every question one by one. Cassius handled Ambrose Lynch differently. He didn't summon him. He didn't send anyone to find him. He simply called a meeting on Friday afternoon, attended by all 17 heads of the organization's divisions, and placed photocopies of the 4 notebooks on the table. He offered no explanation. He read aloud all 19 appearances of Ambrose's name, each one accompanied by the date, the shipment number, and the amount of insurance money paid for that shipment. Then he read the final line Elliot Rhodes had hurriedly written inside his car 2 days before he never came home again. All 17 people remained silent. Ambrose Lynch sat in the second chair on the left, the place he had occupied for 12 years. Cassius closed the file. "Mr. Lynch, you may go home now." Ambrose stood. He remained there with both hands resting on the back of his chair, and he looked around the room, searching for someone's eyes. No one looked up. "What are you going to do to me?" "Nothing," Cassius said. "I won't touch you. I'm only taking back the place I once allowed you to borrow. Then you'll learn which one weighs more." Ambrose Lynch left the building at 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon. No one stopped him. No one took his car keys, demanded the return of his access card, or blocked him at the door. He drove home to the house where he had lived for 20 years and sat in the kitchen waiting for the telephone to ring. It didn't. On Monday morning, he called the warehouse manager, the man who had addressed him with respect for 12 years. The phone rang until the call ended by itself. He called the 2 men who had often eaten lunch with him. Neither answered. He drove to his usual restaurant near the harbor, where the owner had reserved a table in the corner for him for 10 years. She saw him standing in the doorway and turned back toward the kitchen. By the 3rd week, the bank called to inform him that the mortgage on his home had been purchased by a third party, and that the new holder was demanding full repayment. By the 5th week, he tried to leave Providence and find work in Boston, New Bedford, and Fall River. In all 3 places, people heard his name and politely told him there were no suitable positions available. Not one of them openly said they were refusing him because of Cassius Rourke. They didn't need to. In that world, when a man's master stopped speaking to him, it was the same as having his name erased from the ledger, and everyone knew how to read that ledger. 6 weeks after the Friday afternoon meeting, Ambrose Lynch stood at the curb outside the building and waited for 2 hours, only to speak one sentence when Cassius's car passed. The car didn't stop. The call came at 9:40 in the evening from the landline at Ashford Ship Repair, the number Marlowe hadn't dialed in nearly a year. Her father's voice was on the other end, but he managed only 3 words before someone took the receiver from his hand. "Miss Ashford," Sterling Gantry said. His voice was still as courteous as it had been that afternoon when he poured tea on the 9th floor, but now something beneath that courtesy had been worn raw. "Your father is sitting here with me. We're discussing business. Come here. What do you want? I want you to come. Alone. No one else." Marlowe called Cassius within 30 seconds. She didn't ask what he thought. She only gave him the address and told him she was already on her way. Her car arrived first and stopped about 50 yards from the shipyard gate, and she remained inside for exactly a minute and a half until 3 more cars pulled in behind her. Cassius stepped out and walked to her door. "How many people are inside?" "I don't know. Stay here." "No." Marlowe opened the door and stepped out. "He called me. He didn't call you." 4 men blocked the entrance to the shipyard. Cassius's men moved forward, and everything ended faster than it took Marlowe to walk from her car to the gate. There was the sound of bodies colliding, the clang of an iron bar striking the concrete floor, and then silence. By the time she crossed the threshold, all 4 men were seated on the ground, with their hands resting on their knees, and not one of them looked up. Cassius followed 2 steps behind her and stopped at the edge of the light spilling through the doorway. He went no farther. Inside the shipyard, Hollis Ashford sat on a plastic chair in the middle of the floor, his hands on his thighs, his shoulders sagging. Sterling Gantry stood beside him, 59 years old, the collar of his shirt unbuttoned, and there was nothing in his hands. Marlowe walked in empty-handed, carrying no bag, no papers, no phone. "You came alone, didn't you?" "No, sir," she said, "but I came inside alone." Gantry looked toward the entrance, saw the figure standing at the edge of the light, then turned back. "You know what I've lost by now." "I know. 4 years. For 4 years I couldn't understand why my cargo couldn't pass through that harbor. Then your sister came to me, and I thought I finally understood. It turns out I had only stepped into the exact place where they were waiting for me to step." He laughed, a short, dry sound. "Sit down. You and I will speak civilly. Tell your husband to reopen Pier 9. I'll let your father go, and we'll pretend none of this ever happened." Marlowe didn't sit. She stood about 12 feet away from him, her arms resting at her sides. "You're holding a man who has nothing left to sell," she said. "This shipyard was foreclosed last month. My father has no money, no cargo, no one. What do you think you can trade him for?" "For you. You already tried that." Marlowe looked directly into his eyes. "And I stopped being afraid of you the day I ran barefoot through the street." Sterling Gantry opened his mouth to answer, but outside, a beam of light swept across the high windows along the shipyard wall. Then another followed, and tires ground against the gravel. He turned his head. "I didn't call them," Marlowe said. "They've had a case file on you for 2 weeks. I spent 3 hours in the prosecutor's office describing every shipment, one by one. Tonight, you called them here yourself when you called me." Sterling Gantry was let out of the shipyard at 10:20. He passed Marlowe without saying a word, and she didn't turn to watch him go. Once the entrance was clear, Hollis Ashford rose from the plastic chair. He managed 3 steps toward his daughter before his legs gave way, both knees striking the concrete floor, and he bowed his head. He couldn't speak. That 58-year-old man had spent 40 years standing inside this shipyard, and now he was kneeling in the middle of it. Marlowe stepped forward. She bent down, slipped her arms beneath her father's, and pulled him up with all the strength she had. "Stand up, Dad." "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Stand up first." She held him until he was steady on both feet. Then she released him and stepped back half a pace. "I don't need you to kneel," she said. "I need you to stand straight." Hollis Ashford stood there in the middle of the shipyard that no longer belonged to him and looked at his daughter. At the entrance, the man who had remained at the edge of the light all that time still hadn't taken a single step inside. He waited for her to come out. Delaney came to the bakery on a Thursday afternoon and stood outside the glass door for nearly 10 minutes before finding the courage to push it open and step inside. In the 2 weeks since the night at the shipyard, her name had appeared in 3 sworn statements. People had questioned her about the meeting on the 9th floor, about the cash deposited into her account twice, about what she had given to whom, and what she had received in return. Gantry's attorney refused to represent her. The man who had once prepared tea for her with his own hands, now claimed that he had merely listened to some young woman talk about a family matter and couldn't remember the details clearly. Her parents had sold their last car. Delaney sat down in the chair across from her sister, both hands folded in her lap, and opened her mouth to say the words she had rehearsed for the entire journey there. Marlowe didn't let her speak. She reached into the pocket of her apron, took out a small object, and placed it on the table between them. A slender silver bracelet with a teardrop-shaped clasp and a small dent in the third link from the lock. Delaney looked down. She didn't need to ask why it was there, where her sister had found it, or how long Marlowe had known. She raised one hand to cover her mouth and remained that way for a very long time. You knew from that day. Yes. You watched the recording. Yes. Marlowe, Delaney said, and her voice broke. You didn't tell anyone? No. Why didn't you? Marlowe didn't answer. She poured a glass of water, pushed it toward her sister, then straightened in her chair. I spoke to an attorney. He agreed to take your case. I've already paid the retainer, and I'll pay the rest in installments over 18 months. Delaney's head snapped up. Where did you get the money? I took out a loan, in my own name, she continued before her sister could speak. Listen carefully, because I'm only going to say this once. She looked directly at Delaney. I'm doing this for Mom, not because you deserve it. If you want to deserve it, you'll have to do that yourself. Delaney nodded. She didn't apologize again, and Marlowe didn't ask her to. Before rising, Delaney reached toward the bracelet on the table, touched it, then pulled her hand back. You keep it. I will. On Saturday of that same week, a black car stopped outside Mrs. Nell Rhodes's bakery shortly before 7 o'clock in the morning, and Booker Ferris stepped out to open the door for a 63-year-old woman. Isadora Rourke entered the bakery with its 3 ovens, surveyed the room once, then sat in the wooden chair near the window. She ordered nothing. Marlowe wiped her hands on her apron, brought out a cup of tea resting on a saucer, turned the handle toward the woman's right hand, and placed it before her. Good morning, Mrs. Rourke. Isadora looked at the tea. Then she opened her handbag, took out a small velvet box, and set it on the table. She lifted the lid. Inside was a pair of pearl earrings faded by the passing years, fashioned in an old style, their silver settings tarnished. These belong to my mother-in-law, she said. She wore them on her wedding day in 1938. She gave them to me when I became a Rourke bride, and she said only one thing, that this family takes more from its women than it gives. Marlowe didn't reach for them. Mrs. Rourke, I can't. Let me finish. Isadora pushed the box toward her. Last month, I carried a check into my son's living room and sat down across from you. I've done that 4 times in my life, with 4 different women. The first 3 took the check. The 4th negotiated before she took it. She looked directly at Marlowe. You were the 5th, and you were the only one who stood up and made me tea. Somewhere inside the bakery, an oven gave a small click. Then you left. You walked away when you already held everything the other 4 women had wanted. You returned the money he sent. You refused his attorney. You borrowed money from a bank to repay a debt in your own name, at 27 years old, over 62 installments. She tapped one finger against the table. Did you think I wouldn't know? I know everything. I knew before my son did. Marlowe stood motionless. I thought you wanted him because of who he was, Isadora said. It turns out you left him for the same reason. Those 2 things aren't the same, and it took me 63 years to learn the difference. She pushed the box a little closer. Take them. They aren't a wedding gift. They aren't money, and they aren't meant to buy anything from you. These are passed from one woman of this family to another. And I don't have a daughter. She rose, picked up her handbag, and paused for a moment before walking toward the door. Don't let anyone make you feel small, she said. Not even him. Not even me. The bell above the bakery door rang at 7:15 in the morning, exactly 365 days after the morning when the 2 of them had signed their names on 2 forms placed side by side in the marriage registry office at City Hall. Marlowe was bending down to take a tray of pastries from the oven. She looked up and saw a man standing in the doorway, wearing a faded jacket with the name of a shipping company embroidered across the chest, both hands carrying a cardboard box filled with flowers. He walked to the counter, set the box down, then took a sheet of paper folded into quarters from his coat pocket and placed it beside the flowers. It was the original copy of their marriage certificate. It expires today, he said. I haven't come a single day early. Marlowe wiped her hands on her apron. Did you come to take the paper back? I came to return it to you. Cassius slid the paper across the counter. Sign the separation papers, and I'll accept it. I won't fight you over anything, call anyone, or ask anyone to interfere. Or you can choose the life we should have built honestly from the very beginning. She looked at the paper for a long time. Outside, the morning sky still hadn't fully brightened. I have 3 conditions. Tell me. First, your lawyers never move ahead of my decisions again. Anything that concerns me, I learn about before it happens, not afterward. Agreed. Second, we don't settle disagreements with money. You aren't allowed to buy your way out of my anger. Take me somewhere so I'll forget, or pay someone to make the problem disappear. Agreed. Third, Marlowe placed both hands on the counter. Never call a lie privacy again. You're allowed to remain silent, but you have to tell me that you're choosing silence. Cassius was quiet for a moment. That one will be the hardest. I know. Agreed. She picked up the paper, folded it along the old creases, and slipped it into the pocket of her apron. 1 year later, in a row of low buildings near the eastern harbor, there was a pastry kitchen that opened every morning at 5 o'clock. Its sign bore only one word, her name. 3 days each week, that kitchen offered free vocational classes to women who had just stepped out of lives that had left them with no road forward. Women who arrived carrying one bag and nothing else. Marlowe taught them how to read an oven's temperature, how to keep careful records, and how to calculate the price of a pastry so they could earn enough to live from their work. On the afternoon when the 4th class began, she stood outside the door looking in, and Cassius stood beside her holding 2 cups of coffee. Do you remember when you still believed I was a delivery man? Of course I do. Marlowe took the coffee from him. You were much cheaper back then. Sometimes saving someone is simply the right thing to do, but when that rescue becomes a rope that binds them, it is nothing more than a prettier cage than the one they lived in before. To truly help someone is to give them enough safety to choose their own path, even when the path they choose leads them out of our lives. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like, share this video with someone you care about, and subscribe to our channel so we can continue listening together to more compelling stories every day. How did you feel about the story of Marlowe and Cassius? Which character touched you most deeply? And if you had found yourself in their place, would you have chosen to leave or to stay? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, because we sincerely want to hear the feelings that come from the deepest place in your heart. May everyone watching this video always be blessed with good health, a joyful life, and peace each day beside the people you love. Goodbye, and we'll see you again in the next video.